Viewer discretion is advised.
Country, let's rock.
Wait, what?
Russell Wilson has been traded to the Denver Broncos.
I want to talk about how the Broncos pulled off the greatest heist in NFL history and ask, what the hell is Pete Carroll doing? So let's recap why Seattle really lost this trade. Seattle picked an old-ass coach who never won anything in the NFL without Russell Wilson over Russell Wilson. Denver pairs Russ Wilson with the young head coach who got the best football out of Aaron Rodgers. Do you know how I know Nathaniel Hackett is a better coach than Pete Carroll? He wouldn't give up 2 first-rounders for a fucking safety.
Let's rock.
So here it is. Well, they've got 3 timeouts. Yeah. You'd think they'd want a little time to be able to think this over. And use the timeout with 1 second left on the play clock.
Stay tuned next week, though, when we watch the 12th man take revenge on the Seahawks organization after watching Geno Smith and or possibly Drew Lock.
Let's rock.
The Broncos got a franchise quarterback, a perennial top 10, top 5 talent when he doesn't break his finger mid-season in exchange for some draft picks. And we are going to make Seattle really good for the next 10 years. You're welcome, Seattle. You are welcome.
Thank you guys. Thank you guys. Broncos country. Let's roll.
Oh my God, we're going to beat Patrick Mahomes. We're gonna beat Patrick Mahomes, Broncos country! Chiefs fans. I've been waiting a long time to say this. We're back, bitches! And you can suck! Oh, fuck, no! 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 Melvin Gordon fumbles! Alright, fire Melvin Gordon. It's the one thing he knows he has to work on, and it still keeps happening. How the fuck do you do this, Melvin?
Let's rock.
He's going to the right side. He's got Devontae Adams wide open. It's a walk-off fucking touchdown. Nobody's even covering him. Oh, the curse of 16 is stronger than ever. Thank you, God, for proving you don't exist. God is dead.
Let's rock. Let's ride. Broncos country, let's
Before LA sacked up in the 90s, you got beaten worse in the Super Bowl than Conor McGregor did in the 10th round. You drafted Tebow in the first round and made him your starter. Oh, and in the era where Super Bowls are supposed to be close, you started this one out like this, and somehow it got worse from there. Denver Broncos, Pat Bowlen, and the Bowlen Family Trust. The Broncos have been owned by the Bowlen family since 1984 and was spearheaded by Pat Bowlen until 2014 when he stepped down as the team CEO due to Alzheimer's disease. Paul Bowlen, Pat's dad, made his money like a lot of other NFL owners, it seems, in the oil business. Pat has been sued a couple times by the guy he bought the team from over him selling a stake in the team to John Elway, who took over football operations in 2009 when rumors began swirling that Bowlen was suffering from short-term memory loss. And I bet fans want to forget the last 2 years, that's for sure. What many people forget about Peyton Manning's best offensive season in 2013 was that they blew a 24-point lead to the Pats earlier that year. Most people just remember this play though. Cruising out to a first half 24-0 lead, it looked like the late season showdown between the two powerhouses was going to be a yawner. And then Belichick phoned a friend and it was all Pats and Gronk after that until Manning found Demaryius Thomas with 3:06 to tie it up. But the Pats still won in OT for our #1 most cheatingest behavior. Like I said before, YTC puts a big emphasis on roids. However, it's hard to believe that teams have instituted policies and protocols in place. But cheating is cheating, and no team has been caught more at PED use than the Broncos, who since 2003 have had 13 players get popped for PED use, the most in the NFL. Even tiny white receiver Wes Welker was using. It's not that other teams don't inject themselves with chemicals to enhance their game, it's that the Broncos seem pretty bad at getting away with it. And does anyone care? I don't think all the roids in the world is going to make Case Keenum elite. Shaped kinda like a football, the horseshoe with no name has been at the center of naming rights controversy since its inception. The Denver Post initially refused to call it Invesco Field, and then 7 years ago it was renamed Sports Authority Field. Now the park simply has no name. And I hear the place has state-of-the-art audio technology which allows the team to listen in on anyone criticizing John Elway and have them arrested and thrown into a dungeon immediately for besmirching his name. Though technically this was an AFL game, it's still an awful footnote in Broncos history. George Blanda threw for a TD, kicked a field goal, and kicked 6 extra points again. The sick fantasy line. The Broncos would finish 3-11. This jersey is what I imagine to be the only item of clothing in Brandon Perna's closet on repeat times 1,000. I wonder how close he was to ordering that Chad Kelly jersey. Aesthetically, the Broncos tend to push the envelope with their designs, some of which I think are a reach, like drafting Paxton Lynch, Tim Tebow, and signing Case Keenum. Every move one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time has made related to quarterbacks other than signing a surefire Hall of Famer has been a loud backfire for John Elway. You have to look at the crop of characters he has brought in. Guys he could have drafted. Nice play on words for his name. Miles looks like he got a hold of some 10 milligram edibles and is about to munch on some popcorn for the rest of the seasons, while fans complain about Case Keenum and his inability to step up in the clutch.
Case Keenum. Case Keenum.
Here's the other version of the mascot, Acid Mile. Alright, let's install these huge buck teeth and make it look more like Elway. Now that we got that, let's put some blinders over the eyes for how Denver's football god has evaluated QB talent in the draft. And let's slap Joe Flacco on the back, just for fun. Okay, so with the Broncos, even though my buddy Brandon Perna is saltier than one of those healing lambs,
The NFL Network's Adam Rank picked the Denver Broncos to go 2-14 this year. Pretty strange, a guy with the last name Rank sucks at ranking things.
compared to your division rivals, you have much less reason to be salty, since you had two of the greatest QBs ever wear your garish colors. But know this, Broncos fans are salty in some way over Tim Tebow. John Elway can do no wrong. Horrible drafts, lucking into Manning. You fans give him more open windows to escape through than a free porn site. Letting Demaryius Thomas go had to hurt. But you know what pisses you off? Hearing that Raiders fans know more about football than you do. It's not true, but damn, I can feel your anger. You can talk smack back to me, but you'd end up like Aqib Talib and shoot yourself. Originally built as a baseball-only venue, Mile High is more associated with football and John Elway's good luck. Demolished in 2002 to make way for what is now known as Empowerment Field, the former site is marked by a miniature version of Mile High designed to make people think it was simply placed in a giant drop. A stadium that finally got a name, Empower Field scored high by being good at everything. It's well engineered, aesthetically pleasing, and close to the city. Is it the most special stadium? No. But does it suck? No, to that too. You could call my assessment incomplete. Oh, Josh McDaniels. He got off to the wrong foot in Denver, immediately trading franchise quarterback Jay Cutler for Jack Daniels aficionado Kyle Orton. The Broncos actually started 6-0 under Bill Belichick's lapdog before collapsing and going 5-17 to finish out his stint as head coach. Maybe the worst part, McDaniels got caught cheating, much like New England, and they still lost. Another big note from the weather gods, it's one thing when snow is a possible factor in a cold weather city. It's another if it's virtually guaranteed. Plus, casual fans would not be prepared to handle the amount of rocks being kicked up into their rental car windshields during Super Bowl week. Sorry, Perna. No Super Bowl for you.
You're pushing your luck, little man. No Super.
Here's how not to start a season. Lose by 52 points at home to your arch rivals, the Kansas City Chiefs. The Broncos did just that, allowing 4 touchdown passes from Hall of Famer Len Dawson, tossing 5 interceptions on offense. Smoke. Broncos country.
Let's ride.
My God, there's only one person who loves corn more than Dangerous, and it's this kid. I really think they should have brought Pat Shurmur back to call plays. Sucks he got fired, but the scars are real. He was worse than the QB carousel before Russell Wilson. And let's face it, Elway's only talent is stealing QBs, not drafting them. Nathaniel Hackett. And finally, the coach whose last name explains the job that he did. Nathaniel Hackett may or may not have been hired as a bargaining chip to lure Aaron Rodgers to Denver. We don't know if that's true, and we may never know, to be honest. We do know, however, that Denver got the short end of the stick when they landed Russell Wilson instead.
Let's ride.
Wilson may be the first quarterback to have already locked up a gold jacket and actively play his way out of it, because his first season in Denver has been a complete disaster class in quarterbacking. Is that due to Nathaniel Hackett, or is Wilson purely washed? Well, Hackett made it very clear in week 1 that he had close to no idea what he was doing, letting the clock run down in Seattle only to attempt a 64-yard field goal that sailed no good, a harbinger of terrible coaching to come. A week later, the Broncos were so disorganized that the fans at Mile High were counting down the play clock to ensure that Denver didn't suffer another delay of game penalty.
With the fans counting down the play clock.
Yeah, they lost that game. Of course, through 15 games, Denver has the worst scoring offense, thoroughly wasting an excellent defense, and scored just 22 touchdowns, an incredible feat in awful play calling. 10 of those touchdowns came after Denver's 9th game, when Hackett ceded play calling duties to Clint Kubiak. Hackett had already delegated game management responsibilities to Jerry Rosberg, the consultant he hired, who's now taken over as the interim head coach. If he wasn't calling plays and he wasn't managing the games, it's fair to ask what the fuck Nathaniel Hackett was doing. By Christmas, Randy Gregory was throwing punches in the post-game handshake line, and Dalton Risner was shoving backup quarterback Brett Rippon. Hackett was not an embarrassment in the way that Urban Meyer or Bobby Petrino disgraced themselves. He was just not ready for the job. And perhaps he never will be. But he did give us an entire season of this.
Let's relive the most embarrassing new worst game ever, starring the Denver Broncos.
The Denver Broncos. Broncos country. Let's hide. This is a team that has churned through QBs like Taylor Swift through boyfriends. But what's really interesting is the last 6 years in Denver. Sure, you can look like a genius when you sign Peyton Manning, but what's occurred since the sheriff retired can best be described as a tire fire.
Yeah, it'll burn out in an hour or so.
First, let's start with the drafting, which has been awful. Osweiler, Lynch, Drew Lock, and Trevor Siemian. But equally bad have been the free agents, Keenum, Bridgewater, Flacco, and now they have Russ Wilson. Optically, not a bad move, but they gave up a bunch for him and then absolutely whiffed on their head coach. What looked initially like a Peyton-esque acquisition has turned into a bad dream for the Broncos, replete with recurring corny jokes and being memed to death like a cringy subreddit. Who's to blame? John Elway. He's canonized in Denver, and him winning Super Bowls as a player and executive has masked the problems for a long time. Though he's just a consultant now and out of football operations, you have to wonder how long Walmart puts up with poor performance and maybe gives this team a massive overhaul. Russell Wilson. There's not much to say about Russell Wilson that hasn't already been said. He's cornier than a 5th grader's shit in Iowa. He's inauthentic, and his Subway commercial is the only thing I see when I close my eyes at night.
Be careful though. It's spicy.
But there's only one thing that matters. He was really bad at football in 2022. It's not only bad that the Broncos gave up multiple first-round picks and solid players, not Drew Lock, to bring Russ to Denver, but they also inked him to a $245 million deal before he ever took a snap in the Mile High City, with the notable caveat that he had to deal with Nathaniel Hackett as his head coach for 15 games. Russell Wilson was a shadow of himself last year, posting a career low in touchdowns, quarterback rating, and completion percentage. Oh, and if you haven't heard, yeah, he has 12 bathrooms in his house for all those corn-filled dumps. Wilson is the second highest paid player in all of football behind just Aaron Rodgers, but in terms of starting quarterbacks, he was in the bottom 10 last year, if not worse. The Broncos committed picks and Walmart bucks to Wilson just as he began to lose his legendary quickness. Of course, Wilson has the ability to rebound under Sean Payton. The level of dysfunction in Denver last year was the stuff of soon-to-be-written books, so it's fair to assume he'll get better. Tim Tebow versus the Steelers. If you're a believer in numerology, or maybe just a believer in the general sense, the scriptwriters penned a great one for you. In 2011, the Broncos caught fire in the middle of the season, switching out Kyle Orton for second-year Tim Tebow, the outspoken Christian quarterback whose unorthodox throwing motion and unparalleled determination made him a Heisman winner and national champion. His throwing motion also made you believe there was some type of CGI happening to make his ball seem catchable. After an 8-5 start where the Broncos benefited from timely plays like booming field goals from Matt Prater and successful onside kicks, the Broncos stumbled down the stretch, losing their last 3 games and barely eking out an AFC West title in a perfectly mediocre division. Enter the Pittsburgh Steelers, led by a godless, Philistine-esque quarterback and a fearsome defense that allowed the fewest total points and fewest passing yards in the NFL. It was apparent from the opening kick that this would be a game of surreal, movie-like coincidences. The fearsome Steelers defense put 8 men in the box and said, "Beat us." After a couple long connections with Demaryius Thomas, it was abundantly clear that Tebow was doing just that. The Steelers were able to tie the game before the end of regulation, and this wild card matchup drifted into overtime. But not for long. On the first play of OT, Tebow fired a strike to Thomas, and one stiff arm later, the game was over. In storybook fashion. Tebow's unlikely upset of the Steelers might have been enough to convert some non-believers, but the scriptwriters tossed in some numerology that appealed to a wider Christian audience. In college, Tebow wrote John 3:16 on his eye black, a reference to a Bible verse from the book. Look, you know the verse. Probably. Tebow's final stat line in the wild card game, 316 passing yards and 31.6 yards per completion. Not to mention CBS's ratings for the game were 31.6 and the Steelers possessed the ball for 31 minutes and 6 seconds. Is that a little too ham-fisted from the writers? A little on the nose? Probably not for the crowd that asked for the sequel God's Not Dead 2, God's Revenge. This was, of course, what the writers came up with following the 2011 lockout, which was actually a writer's strike in disguise. Despite going through many name changes, turmoil with ownership and Nathaniel Hackett, Mile High Stadium has been a steady, solid stadium in the NFL. It's not particularly wild or groundbreaking, but it is special to both Tom and miniature Broncos fans.
Yeah, that was just effing cool. Like they like the catwalk, which was insane, like just like going up a ladder and doing that, which is crazy. Miles does that pretty often. They also have like the statue of the horse on the other side. It's a nice stadium though. It's downtown Denver, which is like beautiful. The views are really cool. There's an amusement park that's right across the street. And then they have like the miniature Mile High that is in the parking lot, which is really cool. They went out of their way to give me an awesome fan experience and Perna a great one. So they're obviously going to rank higher for me, but like it'd be a cool place to see a game just because of how different it is.
So if you sleep with a midget on an airplane, do you join the miniature Mile High Club?
Number 4, Miles. Another mascot with a really good shtick. Miles does skits and stuff. Sometimes he'll climb to the top of Empower Field to be the highest person in the stadium, physically. And I like the name Miles too, it's clever. Denver Broncos. There are plenty of bad quarterbacks to choose from in the post-Manning era, but none were worse than Paxton Lynch, a first-round pick who was barely good enough to get on the field at all. You might be wondering why Kendall Hinton isn't the pick, but he technically didn't start a game. Philip Lindsay got the first snap out of the Wildcat formation. Whatever, I don't get these dumb rules. Paxton Lynch was just garbage. Denver Broncos Taylor Russolino. The Broncos have a strong history of kickers going back to Jason Elam, who booted a 63-yarder in 1998, and that guy Matt Prater. There simply aren't a lot of good options, so we'll have to give it to this former XFL kicker Taylor Russolino, who replaced the COVID-stricken Brandon McManus for one game in 2020 and proceeded to miss his only field goal try, as well as 2 extra point attempts in a loss against Buffalo. He was promptly cut and never played in the NFL again. Poor guy. Denver Broncos, Patrick Mahomes. Though Brandon Perna made a song about how much he hates Tom Brady. Fuck you, Tom Brady! Fuck you! He had no idea that the worst thing since herpes was coming for him on the horizon. That's right, it's Brittany Mahomes' husband, who in 13 games has absolutely shit on the Broncos with a 12-1 record and 3,505 passing yards and 19 TDs. Up until this year, Mahomes had never even lost to the Broncos. If that doesn't get a fuck you, I don't know what does.
The 80s Broncos. The 1980s Denver Broncos are known today as a one-man band, of course referring to John Elway, who led the team to 3 Super Bowl appearances in a 4-year span from 1986 to 1989. While calling Elway the only reason Denver made those Super Bowls is a little insulting to the good defenses he had in 1987 and 1989, they most likely don't get there without him. Of course, in all 3 of those Super Bowl appearances, the Broncos had illegal things done to them and lost all 3 in decisive fashion. Still, making 3 Super Bowls in 4 years is a hell of an accomplishment. The 2010s Broncos. Alright, so the Broncos make this list because of the Peyton Manning years from 2012 to 2015, in which time they led the league in win-loss percentage and won 12 games every year. They made 2 Super Bowl appearances, the first in 2013 due to their historically great offense, and in 2015 thanks to their historically great defense. As we all know, they got the shit kicked out of them in 2013, but were able to win it all in 2015. The most overlooked year in the Manning era, though, is 2012, which might have been the most complete team of the bunch. If not for Raheem Moore, they probably would have won it all. Denver. Broncos fans in the state of Colorado believe John Elway to be God, even though he put up shitty numbers for most of his career. He didn't start producing like a Hall of Fame quarterback until he had a Hall of Fame running back, an elite offensive line, a Hall of Fame tight end, and great wide receivers around him all at the same time. Not to mention his 2 Super Bowl winning teams cheated the salary cap. Notice how I'm not even talking about the current Broncos, because the only time the Broncos have been relevant on a national level in the last 5 years was when Aaron Rodgers was reportedly getting traded there on draft night. If not for Peyton Manning's neck issues that forced him out of Indy, the Broncos would be going on almost 20 years of irrelevance. Well, to be fair, there was that entire Tebow mania bullshit that ended with the team finishing 8-8 and getting mollywopped by 35 points in New England. Von Miller completely negated his legendary 2015 postseason by getting engaged to a strip. Fuck Colorado for being a marijuana hotbed. Miles, Broncos. This is what the Colts mascot concept should have looked like, only with blue colors instead of orange. Overall, I think this is good. An anthropomorphic horse with a shit-eating grin on its face and solid eyes. Honestly, it might have been perfect if not for the little fluffy orange tail sticking out of its ass. Kinda takes away from the intimidation factor a bit. Nonetheless, rating 8 out of 10. Denver Broncos, John Elway. While I still think Peyton Manning is the best quarterback the Broncos have ever had in a vacuum, as far as career, there's no other option than Elway. Elway made 9 Pro Bowls, won 2 Super Bowls, a Super Bowl MVP, and was named Associated Press MVP in 1987. Debates about Elway's greatness still rage on today due to his numbers not being that great for a Hall of Fame quarterback, but the guy could play. 5 Super Bowl appearances will attest to that. Elway's career still remains more about potential, as in what could he have done if he had been in a better situation in his physical prime. We'll never know, but what we do know is that Elway knows how to slam back some beers. Am I right? Moving. Denver Broncos, George Herring. I'm willing to bet, unless you're a Broncos fan over 70, you've never heard of George Herring before. There are 2 main reasons for this. The first is that he played just 2 years in the early 1960s for the expansion Broncos. The second, and more prominent reason, is that he was absolutely atrocious. He finished his 2-year NFL career throwing 5 touchdowns to 23 interceptions and a 29.3 rating. Rest in peace. Denver Broncos, 1996 divisional round. It was either the Raheem Moore game in 2012 or this, and I decided to go old school. Denver was favored by 12.5 points over the expansion Jaguars. They jumped out to a 12-0 lead before Jacksonville reeled off 23 straight points. Denver cut the lead to 23-20 in the 4th, but Jacksonville answered with a touchdown to go up 10 with 4 minutes left. Elway threw another touchdown to make it 30-27, but Denver's onside kick failed and Jacksonville won. This was the only game Elway would lose at home over his last 3 seasons. Denver Broncos, Jerry Jeudy. Ironically enough, as I was making this video, Jeudy got arrested. That makes more arrests for him than touchdowns scored over the last year. Yikes. The former first-round pick gets talked about a lot for Denver's future, even though he really hasn't shown that he's capable of being a star. He has a star quarterback now, so there's no more excuse. Denver Broncos, John Elway. Elway is simultaneously the best and most overrated quarterback in Broncos history. Well, actually, if I wanted to be an asshole, I would say Peyton Manning is the best quarterback in Broncos history, but Elway will always be the horse face of the franchise. It's simple. Elway was very good, but his stats are extremely mediocre despite the massive amounts of hype he received for being a physical marvel with a rocket arm. He deserved to make the Hall of Fame, but he is not a top 5 quarterback ever like many in the media make him out. Denver Broncos, Russell Wilson. Wilson's a future Hall of Fame quarterback with several elite years left. He gives the Broncos a legit threat at quarterback for the first time since 2014. However, for all of his incredible highlight reel plays and incomparable deep ball accuracy, Wilson is prone to holding the ball too long and taking sacks. Will he finally embrace the short passing game? I have my doubt. Denver Broncos, Russell Wilson. Wilson has his flaws. He takes a lot of sacks and he doesn't like throwing short, but he's like a power hitter in baseball. His strikeouts are more than canceled out by his home runs, in this case his ability to extend plays and his unmatched deep ball accuracy. Verdict, properly written. Denver Broncos. Your team should make the playoffs for the first time since Kevin Durant was in OKC because you have the great Russell Wilson under center now. Speaking of Russ, let's analyze his game. Great mobility and an amazing deep ball. He's also short and leaves clean pockets because he can't see over linemen. He holds onto the ball too long and takes a bunch of unnecessary sacks. He has never developed into an elite quick game passer. As Broncos fans know all too well, he does have a Super Bowl win on his resume, which was solely due to having a legendary defense while he did next to nothing when the game was still in hand. The year after that, he threw the worst interception in NFL history to give Tom Brady another ring, and since 2015, he hasn't even made a conference championship game. But it goes deeper than that. Russ hasn't won a playoff game where his opponent scored a touchdown since 2014. That's your new franchise savior, Broncos Nation. Let's ride? Huh, more like let's ride off a goddamn cliff, am I right? Denver Broncos, Russell Wilson. Wilson is a unique case because he's already going to be a Hall of Fame quarterback someday, and he has a Super Bowl championship on his resume. But after changing teams with an ugly divorce from Seattle, he had the worst season of his career by far in Denver. So really, it's on Wilson to prove that he can get back to that elite status he was in Seattle for so many years, which is a different kind of prove it as opposed to rookies or draft bust or mid-starters, aka guys who have yet to show that they can actually play in the NFL, which is something Russell Wilson has done. I would say his prove it rating is a 5 out of 10. Denver Broncos, Patrick Surtain II. If there's anything that has gone right for the Broncos since winning Super Bowl 50, it's that they nailed Surtain's draft pick several years ago. He has become just as good as everybody thought he could be, but neither Surtain nor honorable mention Justin Simmons' talents will be of any use if the Broncos continue to be pathetic on offense. I wanted to put Russell Wilson as an honorable mention, but he hasn't earned that yet. Although I do believe with Sean Payton there, Russell Wilson will be back on this list by next season. Denver Broncos, 2017, Garrett Bowles. It took a minute for Bowles to live up to his first round status, but the last couple seasons he's been very good. Hit. 2018, Bradley Chubb. Chubb had an injury-prone and inconsistent 4.5 years with the Broncos, never quite living up to his 5th overall draft pick status. But he's too good to be considered a miss, so he's mid. 2019, Noah Fant. Fant spent 3 solid but not spectacular years in Denver before being traded away in the Russell Wilson deal. They got fewer than 2,000 yards and 10 touchdowns out of him, so I have to say he's a miss. 2020, Jerry Jeudy. Jeudy has dealt with drop issues and injuries throughout his young career, but he finally showed some promise in year 3, but thus far, hard to say he's been anything more than mid. 2021, Patrick Surtain II. Surtain has lived up to all the draft hype and more, as he's already a Pro Bowler and an All-Pro in his young career, and he has a very bright future. Hit. Denver Broncos, Russell Wilson. Could it be anybody else? Wilson will be in the Hall of Fame someday, and when Denver traded for him before last season, they expected to get back to the relevancy they had not seen since the Peyton Manning years. Unfortunately, their shittiness continued because Russ was absolutely terrible. And that's not to say that he didn't get a lot of criticism, because he did, but he is one of the very few players whose celebrity goes beyond the field, as he's married to a quote-unquote pop star in Sierra. And and is raising the son of the rapper Future. All those corny jokes are fine and dandy when you're throwing 35 touchdowns a year, but when you're putting up Davis Mills numbers, they stop being funny. Okay, maybe they're still funny, but Russ needs to bounce back, or else Future might continue to release music. Denver Broncos 2013 Peyton Manning. Similar to Dallas, when Denver has won their Super Bowls, it really hasn't been because their quarterback had amazing numbers. 2015 Peyton was one of the worst quarterbacks in the league, and the late 90s Broncos that won back-to-back Super Bowls won those Super Bowls with John Elway putting up good but not great numbers. And in the end, even though 2013 Peyton would end up losing the Super Bowl, his raw stats were too good to pass up. As I've already talked about by now, his raw stats were unbelievable, setting records for most passing yards and passing touchdowns in a single season. Through 18 games, it looked like Peyton might have had a chance at the greatest season ever, but then Denver got blown out so badly in the Super Bowl that nobody ever really talks about that team anymore. Which again is kind of crazy because they broke the all-time single-season scoring record and had a bunch of huge performances, but as they say, nobody remembers second place, unless it's 2007 Patriots, or LeBron James losing in the 5. Denver Broncos, Sean Payton. Payton brings 152 career wins and a Super Bowl championship in 2009 to the Broncos. Detractors will say, though, that he could easily be called the product of Drew Brees, and that since that 2009 championship, he has just a 5-7 record in the playoffs. But considering what the Broncos gave up to get him, and the fact that they're still paying their previous head coach, Nathaniel Hackett, and the fact that a lot of the pressure is actually on Russell Wilson, I see virtually zero chance, no matter what happens this year, where Sean Payton gets fired after one season. Therefore, I'm going to have his hot seat ranking at a 0 out of 5. Denver Broncos. God, I hate talking about the Broncos. They've somehow become more irrelevant than the Titans and Jaguars. In a way, being irrelevant is worse than being straight up bad, because nobody besides Denver fans will ever talk about the 2016 to 2022 seasons in any context ever again. To go from winning the Super Bowl to missing the playoffs 7 years in a row is objectively hilarious, though. Russell Wilson is now Seneca Wallace with a Subway sponsorship, but don't worry, Denver fans. I'm sure Sean Payton, who missed the playoffs 5 times with Drew Brees as his quarterback and has presided over some of the most famous playoff meltdowns ever, as well as that entire Bountygate thing, will lead you back to a title. His one dusty-ass Super Bowl trophy in 15 years as a head coach isn't exactly Vince Lombardi-esque. Broncos fans are the equivalent of an insecure woman in her 40s who laments the sexy new chick every guy is fawning over at work now, aka the Chiefs. Denver fans could rely on KC being their little brother punching bags for so long, but the tables have now completely turned, and quickly. By the time Mahomes is done, KC will have way more rings than Denver, and you Broncos fans can no longer hang your hats on John Elway being the best quarterback the division has ever seen. And just to be honest, Mahomes is literally already light years better than Elway ever was at any point. It's not even close either. It's like comparing Usain Bolt to a Special Olympics. Denver Broncos. A bronco is a horse, and you know what horses are used for? They're used for human entertainment and horse racing, which is disgusting because according to PETA, which is a very reliable source, there are over 700 and 800 racehorses that are injured and die every single year. So shame on the Broncos for glorifying and promoting horses being killed. Animal abuse has gone unchecked for way too long. Fuck you, Michael.
I want to talk about how the Broncos pulled off the greatest heist in NFL history and ask, what the hell is Pete Carroll doing?
It's Mr. Unlimited.
You'd have to be high to trade Russell Wilson.
You have to look at this and say that this is potentially on a historic level, one of the worst trades in the history of the NFL.
Broncos country. Let's ride.
Do you know how I know Nathaniel Hackett is a better coach than Pete Carroll?
Denver on their way to their 8th loss of the season.
Today I want to answer the question, do the Denver Broncos really have the worst offense this century? Like many of you, I saw...
The Broncos won Super Bowl 50 in February of 2016. Now, they're the laughingstock of the NFL.
I was doing treatment on the plane. I was walking up and down the aisles. Everybody was knocked out. I was doing high knees and working on the...
They're saddled with an incompetent head coach running the show, an over-the-hill quarterback, and an albatross of a contract guaranteeing that QB will be in town for the foreseeable future. All of this coming after an offseason full of hope and hype. What went wrong? How did we get here? Why are the Denver Broncos so bad? In the weeks after Denver bested Carolina and Santa Clara, Peyton Manning appropriately hung up his legendary cleats, ending an 18-year Hall of Fame career in the NFL. Denver had his replacement on their roster already, They had drafted Brock Osweiler as Manning's heir apparent all the way back in 2012, and after he had proven himself for 7 games, there was no doubt they would hitch their wagon to the rocket launcher. Only one problem. He didn't want to be there. Osweiler signed a long-term deal in Houston, sticking it to the team who had benched him in Week 17 and leaving the Broncos with just one quarterback on the roster, former 7th-round pick Trevor Siemian. Denver's QB situation was in dire straits, and the Osweiler surprise forced their hand in the draft. GM John Elway got desperate and traded up in the first round for Memphis quarterback Paxton Lynch. Now, Osweiler may not have been the long-term answer in Denver, but he would have saved them from the awful fate of drafting a quarterback who only knew the Fortnite map better than his playbook. That domino led to a quarterback carousel that has haunted the Mile High City for the last 7 years. Siemian, Lynch, the return of Brock Osweiler in 2017, Keenum, Flacco, Allen, Locke, Driscoll, Rippon, Hinton by way of Philip Lindsay, Teddy Bridgewater, and finally, Russell Wilson.
It's Mr. Unlimited.
It's a Brownsian-level rotating door of quarterbacks in Denver. Not one of them surpassed 10 touchdown passes in a season. And the best of that bunch was probably Trevor Siemian, who turned in a serviceable effort in 2016 under Gary Kubiak. It's one thing to list all of the bad quarterbacks that the Broncos have trotted out, but it's another thing to understand why they've avoided finding a franchise quarterback like it's the plague. There have been a number of instances where the Broncos have had a top-flight signal caller in their sights, but for one reason or another failed to pull the trigger. Ironically, the first was all the way back in 2012. Just months after they made the greatest free agent signing perhaps in NFL history, they also committed a huge blunder in the draft. When Denver took Osweiler in the 2nd round, they balked at another quarterback, one who would join them a decade later. Denver had Russell Wilson in their building, and they let him go. Elway loved everything about Danger Russ. His athleticism, his arm, and his ability to extend the play. But he didn't love his height. The Duke opted for Osweiler because he was younger and taller. The rest, of course, is history. Denver ultimately regretted not taking Wilson, who would beat them in Super Bowl 48, and again when Osweiler bolted for Houston. Say what you want about Mr. Limited in 2022, but there's no doubt he would have been a worthy successor to Manning for half a decade. 4 years later, Denver was torn between Paxton Lynch and another QB, Mississippi State's Dak Prescott. Prescott had dinner with the Broncos in the pre-draft process, but missed a flight to Denver, and combined with the DUI, oh, you forgot about that, likely fell out of favor with the Broncos. Swing and a miss. 2 years later, the Broncos brass took a flight up to Laramie to watch Josh Allen play at Wyoming. Allen fit the mold of the prototypical Elway quarterback in just about every single way. Squint hard enough and he may have looked like John Elway himself. But when the time came to make the call, Elway and the rest of his draft balked at drafting another tall white QB with a big arm. A move seemingly out of character for Elway. It was as if he had been bullied and ridiculed into selecting Bradley Chubb, NC State's lengthy pass rusher, at 5 instead. That's not to say the Broncos had the right intention. If they had their pick of the litter, it's likely that Sam Darnold would have been a Bronco, even over Allen. And in a vacuum, the Broncos didn't swing and miss when they took Chubb. Denver got a Pro Bowl caliber edge rusher that they eventually flipped for a first rounder in 2022. But he certainly wasn't what they have desperately needed, a franchise-changing quarterback. Neither was Missouri quarterback Drew Lock, taken in the 2nd round of the 2019 NFL Draft. Locke played at the end of his rookie season, taking over for a 3-8 team, and led the Broncos to 4 victories in their last 5 games. In hindsight, it's the worst thing that could have ever happened to Denver. In Locke's first start, he and the Broncos defeated Phillip Rivers and the Chargers on a buzzer-beater field goal. Thanks to their late season surge, Denver owed Locke a full season at starter, and even worse, they were leapfrogged in the draft by the Chargers. The Bolts took a favorite quarterback of Elway's, Justin Herbert, with the 6th overall pick. Had Herbert not returned to Oregon for his senior season, it's likely Elway would have made a play to get him in the 2019 draft, making no secret of his affection for Herbert. who currently lives in Emmanuel Acho's head rent-free.
Justin Herbert is a social media quarterback.
This series of bad moves would eventually lead to John Elway relinquishing his GM duties after the 2020 season, handing the reins to GM George Paton. And Paton was quickly faced with solving another quarterback dilemma. In 2020, Drew Lock had not fulfilled the promise of his rookie season, and Denver was in a position to draft a dynamic prospect to replace him, Ohio State's Justin Fields. In his first ever pick as GM, Paton opted for Alabama's shutdown cornerback Patrick Surtain II, turning down potential QB options like Fields and McCorkle Jones. Surtain is really good. He's an all-pro caliber player. As for Fields, he's waded through troubled waters in Chicago and taken a step forward in year 2. But if both players reach their full potential, Denver will have erred in not taking a star quarterback over a shutdown corner, no matter how good Surtain is. That's still an if, but with Denver's luck at quarterback, Fields will almost certainly blossom into a dual threat for the ages. Their folly of errors eventually forced their hand into trading for Russell Wilson. And that can be traced back to their decision to draft Brock Osweiler over Wilson in 2012. Of course, the Wilson that Denver traded for in 2022 appears so much unlike the quarterback we saw for the first decade of his career that the difference is staggering. And all it cost was 3 players and 5 draft picks. Yikes. Personnel aside, Denver has also been atrocious in picking their head coaches. It's rare that a head coach only lasts 2 seasons with a team when one of those years culminates in a Super Bowl title, but that's what happened when Gary Kubiak stepped down due to health issues after his second season in the Mile High City. I said it's rare. By rare, I mean that's the only time it's ever happened. John Elway tapped Miami defensive coordinator Vance Joseph to replace Gary Kubiak, and in his first season as head coach in 2017, Joseph parlayed a 2-0 start into a 3-11 finish and dealt Denver their first losing season since 2010 when Josh McDaniels was running the show. Gee, I wonder if anyone's ever made a video about that. For the Broncos, that was the start of 6 straight losing seasons, the longest stretch the team has had since 1972, a stretch that will have any fan questioning their loyalty to the team and their own existential being. Joseph had the team at 6-6 in 2018, led by standout rookies Bradley Chubb and Phillip Lindsay, but the team sank down the drain and a 6-10 finish cost Joseph his job after just 2 seasons.
And here he is, having the time of his life.
Teams miss on head coaches all the time, Joe Judge, but it stings when they could have had someone much better. In that 2017 cycle when the Broncos landed on Joseph, they also passed up on Kyle Shanahan, whose connection to Denver is very much a family affair. Unresolved bad blood between Father Mike Shanahan and team president Joe Ellis stemming from Shanahan's firing in 2008 may have kept the younger Shanny from taking his father's old post. And say what you want about Shanahan and blown leads in the Super Bowl, hey, at least he got to the Super Bowl. 2 years later, Denver replaced Joseph with Vic Fangio, a longtime defensive coordinator whose resume made him appear overqualified for a first-time head coaching gig. It's true that technically Fangio has been Denver's best head coach since Gary Kubiak, but that's not exactly a high bar. Fangio, like his quarterback Drew Lock, showed promise down the stretch in 2019 and again in 2021 when the team started 3-0, but failed to get the squad over the hump in 3 seasons. He wasn't a player's coach. He forbade music at practice, opting for heavy workloads, and adopting the my way or the highway mentality. Again, the pendulum swung too far the other way, and the Broncos ended up with Nathaniel Hackett, whose eternal optimism has been tested through 13 games. If you remove all the factors Hackett cannot control, like injuries, he has been awful. His play calling, decision making, lack of preparation, and overall cluelessness alone have directly cost the Broncos several wins. It seems like every week someone is questioning whether or not he makes it farther than Urban Meyer did his first year, and Meyer got caught on tape finger blasting some bar slut after a loss. Speaking of that, that's where we currently find the Denver Broncos. They're a train wreck, but not in the usual way. They've had a losing record for 6 straight years, but they've always had a good roster, especially on defense. It just goes to show you that one small mistake can end up leading to hundreds. And that's why the Denver Broncos are so bad.
Broncos country. Let's ride.
So the Panthers take J.C. Horn, probably the most physical corner in the draft. Not necessarily the guy that everybody had as the number one corner, but this leaves Fields for the Broncos, and if they don't take Fields right now, well, I guess Mac Jones is available, but...
Yeah, Mac Jones, too.
All right, here we go, guys. Here we go.
With the 9th pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select Pat Surtain, defensive back, Alabama.
What the fuck?
Patrick Surtain Jr.
I love the pick of Patrick Surtain. I love that they took the corner. But I love that pick if Justin Fields isn't on the fucking board. What? That's strike two, George.